Hello, this is Father John Higgins speaking to you from Downey, California. Hello again to all you who are people of faith and goodwill. Today I thought I'd start off by telling you how I became a Catholic. I was raised in the Methodist Church. Right now you can probably hear sirens going by because we're close to the fire department. I was raised in the Methodist Church. My mom and my grandparents on my dad's side all went to Methodist churches. Central Methodist in Phoenix and Linwood Methodist in Linwood, California. I lived in Linwood with my mom. My dad was killed in the Korean War in 1951, so I was only 2 years old. I don't really remember him. I remember lots of stories about him, but stories aren't the same as the real thing. And that's part of the reason why I became a Catholic. In Linwood, I had a buddy. His name was Eddie. I won't really reveal his last name unless he wants to add that as a comment later because he's a friend of mine on Facebook. But Eddie and I were good pals. I think it was in 4th or 5th grade when I used to go over to Eddie's house in Linwood. He lived on California Street, right across the street from St. Emilius Catholic Church in Linwood. You can look that up. It's on the map. I have pictures of it because I've been there. I was there last summer just taking pictures of the place in memory of what a little scoundrel I was. Eddie and I, on Sunday mornings, would collect rocks and hide in his bushes and throw rocks at the Catholics as they drove into Mass. We were little rascals, and I don't know if we did much damage. I don't remember. I hope not. Of course, I've confessed this in the Sacrament of Reconciliation. Eddie and I would throw rocks at the Catholics and laugh. I don't know why we didn't like Catholics, but Eddie didn't like Catholics and I didn't like Catholics. No particular reason. One day I went over to Eddie's house in the middle of summer and he wasn't home. So I stood there and looked across the street at that church and it kind of caught my interest as to what was going on over there. So I walked across the street and I noticed that there was a door open to the church. Now, that was odd for me because I wasn't used to having a church open during the week. On Sundays, we would go to church, either before or after I threw rocks at the Catholics, and it was open for Sunday and for Sunday school, and maybe it was open during the week in the evenings for people if they had meetings or something, but there were no church services that I can remember, except for probably funerals and things like that, special occasions, scheduled on a regular basis. So it was kind of intriguing to me that on a hot summer afternoon, there would be an open door in a church. These are the days before we worked on smog in Los Angeles, and it was burning my eyes, and I can remember not even knowing we had mountains north of Los Angeles. So I walked across the street and walked into the church, and I noticed there was a little bowl of water, and I thought that was for washing my face. And so I dipped my hands in the water and washed my face and went in to see what was going on inside. Well, there was no service going on. It was just dark and quiet and kind of cool because it's a big church. I mean, cool temperature-wise. The place was surrounded by gardenia bushes, so it smelled wonderful inside. And there were people in there, people praying, people with children, and it wasn't just old folks, it was moms with their children. And then I noticed there were kids from the school walking in. I noticed there were young people, adults, and then I saw something that kind of scared me. A police cruiser parked outside of the church, and I thought, uh-oh, there's going to be trouble. A police officer got out of his car and walked in, and I thought, somebody's in trouble. He did a little kneel, and then he knelt on some pads close to I thought it was a little wall. It was an altar rail. He knelt down and said a few moments of prayer, and then he got up and walked back out and started his police car and drove off. I thought that was very strange that somebody would just come in and do that, an adult, a police officer. I sat and watched for a while as people did the same thing. They either prayed in a pew, they sat there quietly, or they went up and knelt at what I would later find out is the altar rail. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have a clue. But I felt this tremendous feeling of holiness and respect. And I didn't know what it was, but I felt something. And I saw in the people their love and respect for whatever it was that they were doing in there. So after a little while, I got up and I started out of the church when the idea struck me. I should probably ask what was going on, and maybe I should become one of these folks, a Catholic. So I walked next door, and I rang the doorbell, and a priest answered, and I walked in, and we sat at the little entrance of the rectory on a bench, and I told him what I had experienced, and he said, I understand. And I said, I'm thinking about I should probably become a Catholic. And he looked a little shocked, and he said, well, you're going to have to ask your parents first. I can't do that unless you have permission. I was only in 4th or 5th grade. So he said, go home and ask your mom and dad. I said, well, I don't have a dad. He was killed, but I have a mom. So he said, go home and ask your mom if it's all right with her. So I walked home, and that evening I asked my mom if it was okay if I became a Catholic. She didn't like the idea at all. She said, never go back to that church. Never, ever, ever go back to that church. Her dad was very anti-Catholic. And I was a little shocked because I didn't know why she was so adamant about it. But you know what happens when you tell a 4th grader, never do that again. I used to sneak out and go over to that church and just go inside. And sometimes I'd meet a friend of mine who I met a little later, Alex DeMartinpre, who lived down the street from us in Linwood on Beechwood Avenue. And he and I would go to Mass on a Sunday morning, and then I'd come home and I'd go to Methodist church with my mom. I didn't know what the Mass was. I didn't have a clue as to why we were doing what we were doing. Alex really didn't explain much to me because he was a kid, I was a kid. I just knew that there was something special there. I learned later what it was. And if you're Catholic, you know what I'm talking about. Later in my life, I kept going back to Catholic churches. When we moved to Downey, I would stop in Our Lady of Perpetual Help Church here in Downey and just go in and spend a few minutes in the sacredness. It was the same thing at Our Lady of Perpetual Help. When I got my first job, it was at a convalescent home down the street from where I live right now, on the corner of Paramount and Gardendale, well, a little bit north of that, in what was then called Westview Sanitarium. I was an orderly. After I graduated from high school, I still had that job, and one of our patients, Mr. Coffey, who had been a Baptist minister, on Christmas Day, 1967, he escaped out the back door of the convalescent hospital and ran. He had no clothes on. He was not a pervert. He was just mentally incapable of understanding what he was doing. So another friend of mine, also named John, he was an orderly there, he and I chased Mr. Coffey. And Mr. Coffey, even though he was elderly, he could run. And he ran clear up to St. Raymond Church and into the parking lot where I guess somebody had called the police, and the police were there, and they wrapped a blanket around him and drove us all three back to the convalescent hospital, and we took him back inside and got some clothes on him. That was my introduction to the parish where I've been pastor now for 18 years. Later on, I was to get jobs in different hospitals, and then I finally got a job. My last hospital job that I had was at, it was my last hospital job was at St. Mary's Hospital in Long Beach, California. And in that hospital, they had a chapel, and I would go into the chapel occasionally. I was an orthopedic technician by then, helping with casts and traction and a little bit of surgery sometimes. And I would go into the chapel every once in a while, just for a few minutes, and every once in a while I'd happen to walk in while they were having Mass, and I'd stand there and just kind of watch for a few minutes. But I was working, so I had to leave. In Central Supply, where we had our office, Mrs. Walsh was in charge of Central Supply, and she was strict. She was very strict. Well, rightfully so. She had to keep Central Supply clean, so we were not allowed to eat or drink anything in our office, even water. We couldn't even chew gum. Later on, I understood why she was so strict, but there was also a sister, one of the nuns, who worked in the hospital, who every Sunday, if I was working, even if I wasn't working, she would do it. But I remember her bringing in a tray on wheels and she would wheel coffee and donuts right into our office under Mrs. Walsh's nose. So I learned in the Catholic Church there are the rules that we really need to abide by, and then there's that love of sneaking in coffee and donuts to young men. And the sisters there were just wonderful to the patients. I know you've probably heard horror stories about nuns and sisters. Well, this is just the opposite. The sisters at St. Francis Hospital down there were just loving, caring women who did their best to serve the patients and to help the other employees. It was during that time that I met a guy named Tom Hansen, who was also an orthopedic technician. And he used to make fun of me for going to the chapel, and it kind of made me, a little aggravated, But one day he said, "Come with me, we're going to go to Mass." And I said, "I thought you made fun of people who went to church." And like my mom, he knew what kind of person I was. I was stubborn. If he had encouraged me to go to the chapel, I probably wouldn't have. But he didn't. Instead, he took me to Mass at a local parish that day, and we started talking about the Catholic Church. Finally, he said, "Well, you ought to just go to your parish and ask again if you can become a Catholic." But this time I was old enough, if I wanted to, I could become a Catholic if I wanted. I was 21 years old. So I did. I went to Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Downey and met a young priest named Father Gary Bowler, who's now Monsignor Bowler. He's retired as well. He welcomed me into the house, and we talked, and I read a catechism, an adult catechism, and a few months later he welcomed me into the church by profession of faith and allowing me to receive my first Holy Communion at Mass. That was in probably 1969. I would have been 21 years old in 1969. From there, I continued going to Mass sometimes, but I wasn't a very good Catholic. But that's for another video. A video that includes how I left the church, what I did while I was gone. I didn't deny the church, I just got lazy. What I did while I was gone and what brought me back again, with quite an experience of God at the Colorado River. So, God bless you. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Leave some comments below if you'd like. Share this with other people. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day, a wonderful week. And hopefully, if you're close by, we'll see you on Sunday here at St. Raymond Church. Or if you speak German, I will also be at St. Stephen's Church in downtown Los Angeles for a German Mass at 9:15 a.m. this coming Sunday. So I'll be here at noon at St. Raymond and 9:15 at St. Stephen's Church in downtown Los Angeles, close to USC. Look it up on Google. So, God bless you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Hope to see you again soon.